Hello and welcome back to the American Ultras Talk channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today, again, another part of the segment of the depth chart series where we are going to be analyzing the depth and the top 10 players that we have for each position. Again, it's a top 10, so bear with us and skip it alongside to about halfway through the bit if you want to see the big names. But it's also interesting to see who we have a little bit lower on the pecking order, players that might be emerging and might be ones to watch in the future. Without further ado, Braden, starting your top 10 for the cam position, the 10, the position that's gone maybe missing in the recent years of modern football. But who do you have there in the 10th place on the USMNT depth chart?
Yeah, so my number 10 at the 10 position is going to be Dwayne Holmes from Preston North End. And I was going to have him a lot higher on this list, especially due to how well he started the season with Preston North End. His first season for them, signing for Huddersfield, started the season on fire. But the Preston kind of tailed off a little bit. He picked up a decent injury that had him out for a couple months, and he wasn't really the same player when he came back. Mind you, still 5 goals, 6 assists on the season in all competitions, Championship and Carabao Cup combined. That's by far his most goal contributions in Europe or in his entire career, unless you go back to his days in League One with Scunthorpe, who, I mean, that was so long ago. Scunthorpe are now in the 6th tier, I believe, in England, so that tells you how long ago that was. Kind of a renaissance for Holmes, but he's another one of those players. John Brooks is the one that's mentioned the most, but one of those players that fell out with Greg. I think he definitely could have been used for a Gold Cup type situation, especially when he was red hot early on in the season. But realistically, he's never going to get another call up because, I mean, he's already 29 years old. Greg doesn't like him. He's basically out the window, but I think he's still a pretty solid player, and he deserves respect because he's built his entire career in England. He hasn't been in the US once. He grew up there, but it's always nice to see players who have different footballing backgrounds to some of the ones that we're used to.
All right. Yeah, that's a good pick. It's a shame that he's not going to get called up anytime soon, but that's a perfect type of player to have in a Gold Cup squad, give the experience to the young players. For 10th place right here, I'll admit that I've struggled to come up with a top 10 right here of players that I think realistically have a shout of being included in the national team. I'm going for Fontana, plays for Pexwool. Amazing club. Honestly, for some reason I like that club. I like the jerseys, even though they're not anything crazy. I have a soft spot for them. I used to play with them on, I think it was FIFA 08, and now I still like them. But yeah, I picked him there. I think he's a good player. Obviously came from a good academy. I was trying his trade in Europe, so I think it's a fair pick right here. 10th shout. It's more of a mercy shout here, just a condolence really, but hey, it's okay. Made my top 10. Now moving on to the 9th position on your list, Braden.
I always love seeing former Union players get some love, even if maybe it's not deserved this time. But for my number 9, I'm going to go for a player who did try his trade in Europe, but it didn't work out, and he's back in MLS now. It's going to be Georgi Mihailovic. And honestly, I think this guy is very heavily overrated by a lot of USMNT fans, and it's not necessarily anything against the player in particular. I just think that some people overhype his ability. When he was with Chicago Fire, I thought he was an okay player, nothing too special. He went to CF Montreal and was amazing for 2 seasons there, but you look back, he was coached by Wilfred Nancy, who has proven himself. You look at the CONCACAF Champions Cup run the crew have had. He is far and away the best coach in MLS and extremely underrated. One of the best coaches in CONCACAF as well, I believe. I mean, having this crew team in the CONCACAF Champions Cup final is an unreal achievement. He seems to turn ordinary, regular MLS players into the best form they've ever had in their life. So I think you can kind of attribute Georgie's form there to Wilfred Nancy, which is why I think some people overrated him a little bit. He went to AZ Alkmaar. Props to him for trying that, trying to go to Europe and further his career. A lot of players we see, unfortunately, don't end up making that decision, and they stay in MLS, and they kind of stagnate a little bit. But Mihailovic, he tried it. It didn't work out for whatever reason. He just wasn't really at the level, especially for one of the premier clubs in the Eredivisie. But he came back. He's with the Colorado Rapids. He had a pretty slow start for the first couple of games, but he's coming to his own now. 2 goals and 2 assists recently. and 2 goals and 1 assist of that all came in the same game, mind you, which I think is kind of a problem that he seems to have. When he was with the Gold Cup team in the summer, he had 2 goals, 2 assists in that tournament. All of them were in the same game against St. Kitts and Nevis. So I think he does tend to pad his stats a little bit in games where he's really feeling it. But when he's on, and his quality is undeniable. We've seen it in the past. Maybe he can get back to that in the future. Still a pretty young player, just 25 years old. But that being said, he's probably older than a lot of the other players that are on this list. So only 9th place for me.
All right, moving on to the 9th place on my list. It's a player that I really like, but I'm putting him in 9th because it's more through a USSF perspective as well as Brian Gutierrez. I think that he gets snubbed quite a lot. For whatever reason, he was part of the photo shoot. That's his latest, and I think that's the last time that he got called up for anything by USSF. And it's a shame, really. I think that his club doesn't do him any favors in that, with him getting released for the Olympic group. Very talented player, but I think that the club, the situation that the Fire are in, and also his lack of involvement with the national team has kind of stagnated his international career. There's also the possibility of losing him but I don't think that we will. But anyways, I put him in 9th right there. A bit of a shame because I think that if I was ranking this based on talent, he would be ranked a lot higher because he has a high ceiling. Moving on to the 8th place, Spraden, who do you have?
Oh, speaking of talented youngsters, I think you actually had this guy in the center mid group. For number 8, I'm going to go for Benjamin Kramaski, the wonder kid that kind of emerged onto the scene for Inter Miami. I use the term wonder kid very lightly here. He basically got some hype because he was a young player, 18 at the time, 19 now, putting in good performances for Inter Miami in Leagues Cup and MLS last season. Obviously, they had a lot of attention on them when Messi joined, Busquets, Alba, and now they have Suarez this season as well. They're obviously going to have the most attention on them of any team by a large margin within MLS and even in the world as well. I think Inter Miami have a lot of recognition now due to just the names they've brought in, even across the globe. And it's allowed Kramaski to shine and really further his career. He had a conversation recently with Javier Mascherano, the Barca legend, Argentina legend, who now coaches their U20s. And he was straight up honest with him, basically telling him in nice words, you should pick the U.S. because you don't have a path here for Argentina, at least right now. He's still 19 years old. You never know what he can become in the future. Maybe he does end up becoming a player that's good enough for Argentina's main national team, and maybe he does still end up picking them. But for now, it looks like he's fairly committed. He had a pretty locked-in spot with the Olympic team until he did suffer that injury, which I think has set him back a lot, and especially with the extremely small roster size for the Olympics, I personally can't see how he gets his spot back in time, which is a shame for him. It would have been amazing for him to be in that competition, but I do think in 2028 he will be still eligible for that Olympics, so maybe he can be a leading part of that. I think he's a good young talent, definitely one to keep an eye on. I think he will end up in Europe, but probably not until Messi and all of his Barcelona friends end up retiring or moving on. Maybe Messi goes back to Argentina for a couple of years. But he's a good young talent. Gets overhyped a little bit because of the Messi hype, but still worthwhile to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think that it was really nice of Mascherano to just cut the delusion. I think that he's not trying to be harsh right there, but I think that Kramaski has some talent. Obviously a talented player, but a very, very wild shot to try to make it into the Argentina squad. So it's a wise choice to stay with us. He was also born here, so it's nice to see. And yeah, I hope that he gets more of a chance to try to get himself into the Olympic roster, because if he does get into that conversation, that would mean that he's playing really well, because at the moment, I don't think he gets in. Anyways, moving on to my 8th position right here. It's a player that you already mentioned. It's Djordje Mihailovic. I have him quite low. I thought I had him quite low right here on my list, but he's surprising. I had him in 9th for very similar reasons. I don't think that Mihailovic is as good as people say. I do think that he's more of a one-season wonder. I thought that one of his seasons at CF Montreal was really, really good. And then even the next one was okay, but went to Europe. I don't really have anything to say against his character. He tried his luck there, but it didn't work at all. A lot of uncertainty on what really happened to cause him to come back. But hey, I think that if you look at even the Gold Cup, he's not at the level that people thought. It's a shame because he has such a cool name. Djordje Mihailovic, what a cool name, man. But anyways, a good player. I think that he's an MLS level player, and it's fine. If this is the type of player we're going to have in our league, the caliber of 10s that we're going to have, that's really good. It's a sign that we're moving in the right direction. because in past times he would definitely be a starter for the national team. So happy and props to him for trying his luck. He had one of his best matches just before he came back to MLS, so maybe he could have tried. Maybe he tries again in the future. So Mihailovic in 8th place for me. Moving on to 7th, Braden.
For number 7, I'm going to go with a guy that you already mentioned already. It's going to be Brian Gutierrez, the Mexican-American dual national. And like you said, I think the Chicago Fire have really stagnated his international career, to say the least, not releasing him for a couple of the Olympic camps, which has resulted in him not even being considered anymore. For the last Olympic camp, the news broke that he wasn't even called up in the first place. The past couple, he got the call up, but the Fire denied to release him. The most recent one and the final preparation camp before the summer, he wasn't even called up in the first place. So I think basically by not releasing him in the past, the Fire have kind of taken away his chance at even being in the Olympics. There's no guarantee he was going to have a spot in the final roster regardless, but at least he had a chance there. It was interesting that he was in the Olympics photo shoot, especially because of that, but he was with his teammate Sergio Orahel. I think it's just because the USSF HQ is still in Chicago for now until they move it to Atlanta, and it was probably just easy to get 2 Fire players in there. But I think Gutierrez is a really good player. I think he's slept on a lot. But again, the Chicago Fire, I'm going to criticize them again. They have him coming off the bench this season. He's been very effective as a super sub. I just really don't understand why he's still on the bench and not starting. I think he's definitely worthy of starting. He started a lot for them last season, got 10 goal contributions last year, and already has 4 in 9 games as a bench player for most of it. So it looks like it's going to be his best season by far in MLS, maybe even a breakout if he can get back in the starting lineup, and I think he's deserving of number 7 here.
All right, and in 7th place right here, I have Taylor Booth, a player that maybe is a little bit too low right here. I rate him a lot with the quality that he has, but the season was really bad. I think it was underwhelming. We were expecting another. I think last year can be considered a breakout season. This year was to stand out and propel himself to another move. Very disappointing season. Not really much of his fault. It was due to injuries. I don't think he's a lock in the Olympics roster at all, which is a really sad outcome because I thought that he was in the fringes for the first team, and Utrecht managed to get themselves in form without him as well. And I think that he doesn't have a position locked in. This is where he's going to play, and I think that if a club looks at him, they don't know where he's going to play. And I think that's never really a nice thing, not a nice position to be at. We look at Weah, for example, bouncing around through positions without really maximizing their ceiling. That's my concern with Booth. And I hope that next season he can get back on track because a really, really huge talent. I think that there are good things for him to come. Maybe he gets that Man United move someday that we read about last summer. Moving on, getting closer to the top 5, Braden. Who is it in the 6th place?
For number 6, I'm going to go for a very similar player to Gutierrez. I'm going to go for another Mexican-American that we probably won't end up losing, Diego Luna. Like I said, very similar players, same age, same position. They're both kind of winger cam hybrids. They're both young stars in MLS. And the reason I ended up picking Luna over Gutierrez is a couple of things, actually. His experience at the international level, I thought he was one of the best players at the U20 World Cup in that somewhat decent run that we had last summer. For that, and also in MLS last season, especially after that. He wasn't really playing much before the summer, but RSL, props to them. They saw his performances and decided to give him a chance. He has almost half the amount of minutes last season in MLS as Gutierrez, and basically has the same production. His per 90 numbers are way higher. This season, it's kind of been a slow start for both of them, actually, more so for Luna, but I think his quality will shine through in the end. I think he is slightly a better player than Gutierrez, has more international experience, and I think he's such a unique player in the way he plays. He plays on the wing usually, but realistically, I think his skill set is best suited to be a 10 in the midfield, creating chances and trying to take on opponents 1v1. I don't know, the way he plays is unlike anyone else you could ever watch. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we're yet to find out, but he's a very unique player, very exciting player to watch, and I've got him just outside the top 5.
This is the first player that we have exactly in the same spot. I have Diego Luna in 6th as well. And the reason is I think he's a very silky player. He is very unique to watch, a unique appearance as well, which is nice. It adds to the folklore of his character. But I think that he's a really, really talented player. Make no mistake, double-footed as well. That's something that we don't really have. And I like that he's really direct. Luna's the type of player that really tries to have a goal, has a good vision, a good pass in him, and I like how direct he is, and a very realistic player, realistic mind as well, thinking about going to Anderlecht instead of these huge clubs and trying to be a bit part player in those squads. So hopefully he gets a move. I think that he is going to get called up to the Olympics, and yeah, he had a good U20s World Cup last season. Hopefully this summer he follows up with another good performance for the USYNT. Now moving on to the top 5 we got there, Braden. Who is it?
So I'm going to go for another Olympic eligible player, and this is where my criteria for the list gets a bit shaky, because I'm going to go for Cole Bassett here. And I think a lot of the arguments are going to be that he's very similar to Mihailovic in that he tried going out to Europe, same league actually in the Eredivisie. It didn't work for both of them for separate reasons. They both came back. Bassett came back to the Rapids. He was there before. Mihailovic came back to the league with the Rapids. He was, obviously we spoke about with the Fire and CF Montreal before, but they're now in the same club. And I think having Mihailovic at the 10 for the Rapids has kind of limited Cole Bassett a little bit. He plays more like a 6 or an 8, a little bit further back than I would have liked him to this season. But despite that, he's still creating a bunch, and he's developed a clutch gene, which I think is nice. A game winner against their biggest rivals, Real Salt Lake, on the road. An 88th minute equalizer against Inter Miami, like we spoke about with all their big names. I think he's developing, honestly, a real main character mentality at the Rapids. I mean, it's clear to see they love him there. He's a homegrown player before he ended up making the move to Feyenoord and eventually Fortuna Sittard. The fans already know how good of a player he is. He's come back. He's found his footing. I think last year he was the only bright spot for the Rapids team that was absolutely abysmal. They made the right moves in the transfer market, and I think all the added players around him have really helped him step up his game. Selfishly, I really like Cole Bassett as a player. I'd love to see him in the Olympic roster. I don't think it'll happen just due to his age, maybe his lack of potential compared to some of the other players, and the competition for spots in the midfield is so competitive. But I think he's a great player. I think he'll be back in Europe at some point, maybe not too soon, because I think he'll try to establish himself as one of the premier players in MLS with the Rapids, but I'm rooting for him. I've got him in the top 5.
All right, my top 5 right here starts with a player that you had way lower in the list is Dwayne Holmes. I think he's a baller. I like Holmes. I think that he's a baller. Anytime I watch him, what a good player, really. He reminds me of the typical 10 that plays in the Brasileirão. A really technical player, a really good ball control as well, experienced. So I don't know how to justify this one right here, but I would say that if the A team was to have a bunch of injuries to the main guys, he would be ahead of all of the ones I listed below him. So, in my opinion, that's how I kind of see it right here. I think he's a really good player, respectable career as well. And maybe when he does make a move to the MLS, if he ever does, I think he's going to shine because he's a really good player. It's a shame really that he fell off with Greg and won't really get a call up again. But nice one. I thought I would mention him right here. Moving on to the top 4, maybe a player that you would call up to the main roster if you had to, Braden. Who is it?
Okay, it's definitely not a player I'd call up to the main roster, because if I said I would call him up, I'd get so much hate in the comments. And the reason for that is it's a player who I think most people don't usually see as a 10, but I think it is in reality his best position. It's going to be Jesus Ferreira, El Pirata, the Caribbean merchant from the Gold Cup and all sorts of Mickey Mouse competitions that the USMNT plays in. And look, I think that if we're going to argue for potential, he's probably a lot lower on this list. Will he ever play for the USMNT again? Who knows? Maybe he'll get more Gold Cup call-ups. But I think the experience he has speaks for itself. He's played so many games for FC Dallas as such a young player. I think we forget a lot. He missed the cutoff for being Olympic age eligible by a week. And it's so unfortunate for him, but literally if he was born 8 days later, he'd be Olympic eligible and probably the starting striker for that roster. Him and Duncan Maguire would be probably battling that out. I don't think Johan Gomez would have a shot compared to those two players, considering that Johan Gomez came up at a similar time at FC Dallas to Ferreira and ended up getting shipped out to Europe because he couldn't break into the team. So I think Ferreira's experience speaks for itself, and I think the area that we've seen him shine the most for the national team is creating chances, playing some through balls. He has a really good eye for a through ball on him. He creates a lot of assists, and ultimately that's my logic. I also think our striker position, we'll get to that in a future video, but it's so stacked. He has no chance there. I think he would have a better chance of the 10 position, not to say he should ever get a call up again, but listen, who knows? If he keeps getting called consistently in the Gold Cup, maybe he'll become a top 5 all-time scorer because he loves to bag hat tricks against tiny islands.
He's the gold too, man. If we're playing in these Gold Cups, if he was in that Trinidad and Tobago game, we would have won. Honestly, the guy he's a part of the Caribbean for a reason. Props to him. Moving on to the 4th spot right here for me, I have a player that you already mentioned. I thought I had him really high. It's Cole Bassett. I was always a big fan of him. I am a big fan of him. I was really sad when he came back to MLS. Maybe it was a necessary step because now, getting to play week in, week out. I thought that last year, I agree with you, he was the only bright spot on that team. That was, frankly, it was not that hard to be a bright spot. Everyone sucked. But this year, I also think that he's the only bright spot. I truly think he's the best player for them. It's sad for me that they try to accommodate George Mihailovic, who's a big signing. They're probably their marquee signing for outfield players as the 10. But I think that Bassett is younger, a better player, has a good mentality. Hopefully he gets to go to Europe again. He mentioned in the past that he would like to, he would be open to and wants to go back eventually. He's still a young player. I really hope that he gets a shot because I think that he has quality to be amongst, let's say, a player right next to the guys on the main roster if they were to get injured. So really root for him, and I hope that he does get a move soon. And I wish that he could play in the Olympics as well. I don't know if he will, but I think that he should. Moving on to the 3rd place right here, the 3rd best 10 that we have. Braden, would you call him up to a main roster?
Yeah, I think this is where our list started to get very similar here because I think the top 3 kind of picked themselves. So we'll start with number 3. Has to be Paxton Aronson for me, the younger brother of Brendan, of course. And he has actually had a main USMNT call-up, didn't end up getting on the pitch. He did play in one Camp Cupcake friendly back in 2023, but never for the A team, although it was cool to see him get called up for, I think it was actually that game against the first, both legs against Trinidad and Tobago that he got the call up for. And who knows, maybe if he was on the pitch, he wouldn't have suffered that loss, but probably not. But I think it's been an interesting career path for him to take. Coming up through the Union Academy, obviously, he was in a bit of a tricky situation because the position he plays at the 10, the Union's marquee player and now all-time leading goal scorer plays the same position. So there really wasn't a place for him to break into the team. Add to that, Quinn Sullivan at the time was also primarily a 10. We know now he's kind of shifted positions. He basically plays everywhere on the pitch at this point. But he was fighting for minutes with Quinn and Daniel Gazdag as well, the Hungarian international. He decided to make the step despite never really breaking into the team in MLS to Frankfurt, and I think it paid off. I think initially when he arrived there, he surprised a lot of people. Whenever he did come onto the pitch for Frankfurt, it was pretty rare, but I think he was really, really bright and promising. Ended up getting this loan to Vitesse after kind of stagnating the season, although he did get 2 assists, one in Bundesliga and one in the DFB Pokal before leaving. And I think the loan move, it's kind of like a Cole Bassett at the Rapid situation last year. He's the only bright spot in the Vitesse team. We all know the struggles that they've had on and off the pitch, getting to that point deduction. The players are frankly abysmal. Half of them are on loan. Who knows what's going to happen to the club in the future, but Paxton's been great. He's regaining his confidence, 4 goals in the Eredivisie, including a crucial brace to get them back in the positive point tally against Fortuna Sittard, Cole Bassett's old team actually. This past weekend. And yeah, I think Paxton's an incredible player. Still just 20 years old. He should be the starting 10 at the Olympics, provided we do play with the 10, which to be honest, we probably won't considering the formations we've seen played in the past. I hope Paxton starts. Even if he doesn't, I think he'll be a crucial player off the bench. He was the best player at the U20 CONCACAF championship a couple of years back that qualified us for the World Cup. Unfortunately, he didn't get the release for the World Cup. I think he would have been our best player there as well. Very excited to see how his career progresses, and maybe he'll get a higher up Eredivisie loan next season.
Absolutely. I also have him in 3rd spot because, well, very similar reasons to yours. I'll cite a few ones that I think you didn't mention, and I'll say right here. In the game against France, which was our toughest opponent in the preparation of this Olympic cycle, I thought that he looked a lot better, more lively, and more ready, really. Not really the pressure when compared to Kevin Paredes, who's a player that's a lot closer to the A team in a lot of people's eyes. And that was with Paxton drifting out wide. He really should have had an assist with a Buzio miss. And I thought that Paxton looked good in the game. He always plays well when I see him play. When he was playing at Frankfurt, wasn't anything great, but not out of place by any means. And that's really promising from a player that didn't even get to play in MLS. So I think that he's a lot closer to the A team than people think. Some people might have some predisposition opinions based on what his brother has done, and some people don't like his brother. But I think that Hayden Paxton is a really talented player, has a really high ceiling as well. And I think that he's going to have a great career, and it's going to be a for sure guarantee on the A roster going forward. So I really like him, and I think he'll be crucial in the Olympics as well. I think that he's going to be our main source of goals. I really do think so if he plays as a false nine. Now, moving on to the second one, Reyna, surprise us all. Who is it?
Yeah, this is the debate now. You've got two very good players emerging at the number 10 position. One who's been on the radar for so long, and another who's kind of burst onto the scene, the dual national, and that is who I'm going to ultimately pick at number 2. Ultimately, I'm going to go for talent and potential over form for number 1, and Malik Tillman's going to be my number 2. What a season he's had for PSV. And I think it's crazy how adaptable he is. He went into his first professional season with Rangers last year, came out with 12 goals and 5 assists in all competitions, almost breaking 20 in a first professional season in a year that you're playing Champions League as well as being in one of the best teams in your league. I think it's very impressive, although we all know the Scottish League isn't exactly the highest quality of opposition, but still a goal and assist in the Champions League that year as well, including I think actually against PSV, where he ended up going this year, and even better, 9 goals, 12 assists in all competitions. If you count penalties drawn, he's up to 15 assists. Personally, I don't. I think that's a little bit of a cheap stat. But if you do, it just adds to his total. Either way, he's over 20 goal contributions in just his second professional season in a completely new team as well. He's had to adapt to the language and the culture. I'm sure having USMNT teammates around him like Pepe and Dest and even Ledesma at times has helped out a little bit. But I think it's very impressive how adaptable he has been at the past 2 clubs. I think it'll be very interesting to see in the summer if Bayern decide to take a shot on him, at least in the preseason, or maybe PSV. I'm sure PSV will try their hardest to sign him on a permanent deal. There will probably be other suitors as well. There's been Premier League interest in the past, and that was before he had this breakout year at PSV, so maybe he'll end up there. He's going to have so many options this summer. It's going to be so exciting to see what decision he makes.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I'm not going to do anything crazy right here. It has to be Tillman in second spot right here. I really like him. Again, very early in his career. And I thought that with his age, maybe we could have seen him a little bit earlier, but he had a bad injury in his academy days. And he definitely put that behind him because the season last year, it was a very weak league. I don't rate the Scottish League by any means, but really impressive for a guy that was having his debut season. Now this year, he adapted to a new league, new expectations, played really well for PSV, adapted to the alarm clock as well, never had a problem with showing up to match day again. What a player, honestly. I feel like if he refines his shooting, if he refines the decision making, he can be a really special player. I'm really happy that we have him as an option. I think that if he was to go to the Olympics, he'd be one of the best players in the entire competition. And I just think that for the USMNT, he does lack a good performance so far. He hasn't really had one, but I'm pretty sure he's going to have plenty of them in the future. What a talented player. But at the moment, he is behind number 1. And who is it, Braden?
Of course, the USMNT star boy since he was basically 17, honestly, breaking out of the scene at NYCFC. It's going to be Reyna. I think this pick kind of speaks for itself. There is a debate for Tillman. He's definitely the more informed player, but like you said, for the national team, the performances haven't been there just yet for Malik. And for Reyna, it's been the opposite. Despite his struggles at club level, we all know what happened this season. Basically lost a year at Dortmund for the first half of the season, wasn't playing at all. Decided to go on a loan move in search of more game time and somehow got less game time. I don't know how that's possible, but the Nottingham Forest experiment has been a disaster for him. Hopefully he can wise up and make a good career decision in the summer, whether it's staying in Dortmund or making a transfer, whether it's a loan or a permanent. He needs to find a club where he can play consistently, because even the season before that, he was very productive in the minutes he got, 7 goals, 4 assists in all competitions, but he still didn't play a lot. And if it continues like this, it's going to really hurt his development, because we've all seen the talent that he can be. Whenever he plays for the USMNT, it seems he shows that superstar potential that he showed back when he was emerging at NYCFC as a young 15, 16, 17-year-old kid who went viral all around the globe for his highlights. I think the talent that is there. I mean, you can point to so many great performances for the national team. He just has to get his club situation together, and there won't be any more debate.
Absolutely. I also go with you at number one, a vital player for us. I think at the moment for the season, definitely, I think that the USMNT served as a safety net for him, really. A place that he feels comfortable, gets the minutes, he's the guy. And I think he just needs that for club level. I get that going to the Prem was probably something he wanted to do. He aspired to play in the Prem someday. But yeah, the move was abysmal, to say the least. And I think that if he takes maybe 2 steps back and goes to a smaller club in a good league, maybe La Liga, Serie A, or even Bundesliga, mid-table, I think that would be really beneficial for him. He has the quality to really burst out. I don't think he's going to be world-class. That is subjective as well to what you define as world-class, but he'll be so important for us going going forward. Everything will go through him. He's our number 10 for a reason, and I think that he's definitely, if not if not the most talented player we have in our roster, period. So that brings it to a close. The top 10 best number 10s that we have available to us. It's really nice to see how much growth we've had recently, and thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, leave down below your top 10. We always enjoy looking at those and replying to the comments. Share with your friends, and we'll see you next time.